Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about the Maple Leafs being interested in Hampus Lindholm, according to Elliotte Friedman. So it was Friedman on the Jeff Merrick show saying, I do think that Lindholm was Toronto's guy. I do. I think that was the guy they've been looking at, and he was number one on their list. And if you would like to hear more of me and my SportsCenter Insider Trade Hat, discuss more on what the Maple Leafs could potentially do at this year's trade deadline, I was on the Buds All Day podcast, which I will leave linked in the description of the video, just yesterday, discussing a whole bunch of potential trade options. So make sure to go over there and check that out. The guys over there are really awesome. The Anaheim Ducks are 10-15-3 since the start of 2022, which sits 28th in the NHL in terms of points percentage. And with them just trading away Josh Manson last night to the Colorado Avalanche, it doesn't look like things are going to be getting any better for the Ducks anytime soon. The Ducks were sitting pretty close to the playoff picture earlier on in the season, and for a smaller market team like them to get into the playoffs and collect that playoff revenue, it would have been worthwhile. But with Lindholm, a guy who's a UFA at the end of the season, there has been talks about a potential extension, but as the deadline does get closer, the likelihood of him possibly being traded away does increase. But the question remains, should the Toronto Maple Leafs be interested in this player? We'll dive into some more contextual stats as we go along, but if I'm going to be honest with you, it's not that great of a start if we're just looking at his evolving hockey player card. But if we're taking a look at some of his micro stats from this season, you can see why a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have been looking to clean up their defense off the rush, would be interested in a guy like Hampus Lindholm. The 6'3", over 200-pound left-handed shooting defenseman does do a really good job at defending his own blue line, which was also the case last year, where he had a much stronger season overall. But we'll get to that in a minute. Lindholm, over the 3 previous seasons to this one, has been an excellent defender, and he's eaten up a ton of really difficult minutes for the Ducks. Hampus Lindholm this season has played pretty much exclusively with the rookie defenseman Jamie Drysdale, although I wouldn't blame Hampus Lindholm's struggles this year on Drysdale, as we'll see in a minute. Heading on over to hockeyviz.com, if we're taking a look at the Anaheim Ducks' defense, when a guy like Hampus Lindholm is on the ice, you're going to see that the Ducks surrender a ridiculously high volume of shots coming from right in front of their net, and that's never a good sign to see. Even though Lindholm does spend a vast majority of his ice time playing up against the other team's players, this is not what you want to see. But if you're taking a look at the results from last season, or even the year before that, they are much more encouraging. If we're taking a look at Lindholm's Anaheim teammates this season, with and without him, and how they've performed, this is not exactly what you'd want to see. Usually the way that I explain these with and without charts is that if you see red in the bottom half of it, that means that guys are worse defensively when they're playing away from this specific player. But in Lindholm's case, several of his Anaheim teammates are much better defensively when not paired with him. What this chart is also telling us is that Hampus Lindholm, while playing away from Jamie Drysdale this year, has been significantly worse defensively. But to be fair to Hampus Lindholm, so has Jamie Drysdale. So maybe what we're seeing here on this with and without chart is guys who are playing away from Lindholm just are playing in more favorable matchups. Because again, Hampus Lindholm does play more minutes than anyone else on the Anaheim Ducks against the other team's best players. If we're taking a look at Hampus Lindholm here, he does spend the highest percentage of his time on ice playing up against the other team's best players, and he does so playing in a neutral role. And while the overall numbers in terms of the shot attempts and the dangerous Fenwick 4, which measures the quality of unblocked shot attempts, may not be on his side, in terms of the numbers relative to his teammates, they're actually pretty good. Sometimes we get caught up too much in the underlying numbers, and we're not just looking at what a guy is good at and how he can fit in on your team. We've discussed whether or not a guy like Jake Muzzin is coming back before the end of the regular season at length now. To me, I just can't get past the fact that while Jake Muzzin is on LTIR, that the Maple Leafs continue to operate above the salary cap and burn through any sort of cap space that they had to work with at this year's trade deadline. Kyle Clifford has been actively sitting on their roster for the last 2 weeks, not doing anything other than burning through money that the team has to work with at this year's trade deadline. And you can call this management group a lot of things, but what they aren't is bad at managing the salary cap on a daily basis. Ever since Nick Ritchie was placed on waivers in January, the Maple Leafs have diligently and meticulously made paper transactions each and every single day to try to ensure that they had the most amount of cap space to work with at the trade deadline as possible. But now Jake Muzzin is coming back before the end of the regular season, and they've just burned through all that space just having Kyle Clifford not play any games. It makes absolutely no sense to me. But there are some things that the Maple Leafs can do to create some cap space for themselves, even if a guy like Jake Muzzin were to return before the end of the regular season. Now, if the Maple Leafs were to send down Erik Källgren, Carl Dahlstrom, and Kyle Clifford, and even include a guy like Travis Dermott in a hypothetical deal, they could have as much as $2 million in cap space. And if you got 50% salary retained or even involved another team, you could potentially stretch that to as much as $6 million. Now, if you wanted to be extremely aggressive, you could place a guy like Peter Mrazek on waivers and gain access to another $1.125 million in cap space. And at that point, you'd have about $3 million to work with, which could be stretched into 6 or even 12 with the potential of retained salary. Salary retention is very expensive, and ideally, you don't rely upon it, but it is an option. But more importantly, if we send down Källgren and waive Peter Mrazek, all we're left with is a injured Jack Campbell. In my mind, if you are calling the Anaheim Ducks for Hampus Lindholm, Anthony Stolarz needs to be in that deal as well. A 28-year-old goalie, only making $950K against the salary cap this season and again next year as well. In 21 games this year with the Anaheim Ducks, he's got a .919 save percentage and the second highest goal save above expected among any of the goalies who are on this list who are rumored to be available. If we're trying to imagine what this would cost the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Ducks have pretty much set the precedence here with a second round pick and a B to a B plus level prospect being the price for Josh Manson. The addition of Stolarz in this deal, I don't really know what the goaltending market is, or for a guy who's 28 years old and who has never been a starter before, he wouldn't be taking over the job and leading the Toronto Maple Leafs to anything. He would just be a plan B, a guy who's having a decent season and a guy who could step in for Jack Campbell if he's not able to regain form. I think it's interesting that the Maple Leafs are so heavily interested in a left-handed shooting defenseman when they already have Morgan Rielly, Jake Muzzin, and Rasmus Sandin to play the left side. Does that mean that we could see one of them shifting over to the right? I mean, we've seen Sandin play a few games there, but it hasn't necessarily been something that they've really tried that much or had much success with at this point anyway. I'm not going to try to overblow the underlying numbers from just this season, but they might make you a little bit wary, and I wouldn't say that you were wrong for feeling that way, but at the same time, Hampus Lindholm does have a long resume of being a top pairing defenseman in the NHL. Because Hampus Lindholm makes $6.75 million in real money this year, I can't imagine the Ducks would be very happy to just pay him all of that money, not make the playoffs, and then not be able to re-sign him. So maybe that's a bit of extra incentive for them to get a deal done if they're not able to work out an extension, especially by the trade deadline. Overall, I don't really know what to think of acquiring a left-handed shooting defenseman who's going to be a UFA at the end of this season. That really turns me off from the deal, more so than just the underlying numbers not looking the greatest. I like the fact that he defends well against the rush and is doing so this year despite the underlying numbers not being the greatest and has in the past as well. I don't know what the ask would be. I would not be comfortable giving up a first round pick and a good prospect in this deal, even if Stolarz was involved. Because I don't view him being the goalie of the future or anything like that. And I don't necessarily think that they'd be in a position to re-sign a guy like Hampus Lindholm this offseason. I've been looking at the Puckpedia page for the last 5 minutes, and I can't for the life of me figure out what the Maple Leafs are going to do at this year's trade deadline. I have no idea. Absolutely zero. And I hate that we have to talk down about a team that is so damn good because it has such obvious flaws. I absolutely hate that. I hate it. I hate it. The team is probably the best that it's ever been, but people can't believe in it because the goalies can't stop a puck and the defensemen don't know what they're doing in front of their own nets. Even when you look at the standings, it's a glass half full, half empty sort of scenario because they're 6th in the NHL in terms of points percentage and 3 points back at the Tampa Bay Lightning, but only 2 points up on the Boston Bruins, who were miles behind them just a couple of months ago. But does it really even matter? Because as it sits right now, they would play Tampa in the first round, but if Boston passes them, they would play either the Panthers or the Hurricanes. And to be honest with you, I think they match up a bit better against the Hurricanes or the Panthers because the Panthers don't have very good goaltending either. And the Hurricanes are the Hurricanes, and they're not as heavy as a team, but they're very skilled. But in the games that they've played them this year, they've been in it. Plus, we all know how Frederik Andersen handles playoff pressure. I hate that a team this good inspires absolutely no hope at all. And maybe that's a problem with us, but then again, I don't really know if it is. Because you could say that a guy like Jack Campbell, if he just comes back and returns to form. Remember, I keep saying that from March of last season going into December of this year, he played in 44 out of a possible 55 games and had a .932 save percentage. Yeah, but if you're looking at it this season, the Maple Leafs have only had good goaltending or goaltending above 900 for one of the October, November, December, January, February, March, 6 months this season. The one thing I will say is that I cannot wait for the trade deadline to come and go so we can finally know what this team is more or less going to look like going into this year's playoffs. But even then, there's going to be room for saying, well, this guy can do that, and this guy can do this, and that can happen, and this can happen. They haven't actually blown or lost anything so far this season. You can't criticize them for things that you think that they will do, but at the same time, they have done that thing a lot the last couple of years, haven't they? I'm sorry that I'm not very optimistic. I'm sorry that I don't really have anything inspiring or hopeful to say. Just, it is what it is right now. Maybe we'll feel differently in a week or two. That's how this usually works, right? So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.